If there's one thing we all silently hope for in this world, it's not necessarily to be agreed with, not even to be loved unconditionally. We just want to be understood, deeply, accurately, without having to explain ourselves from scratch every time. And yet, that very thing, understanding, is the rarest currency in human relationships. Most people hear words, fewer hear what's behind them, and almost no one hears the silence between them. But that's where the truth lives. That's where we live. The truth about how we feel isn't always in what we say out loud. It's in the hesitations, the shift in our tone, the way our eyes dart away for a second when asked, "Are you okay?" You see, what most people don't realize is that when we speak, we're not just exchanging facts. We're revealing fragments of our emotional world, sometimes indirectly, sometimes clumsily, but always truthfully if someone's willing to really listen. Think about it. When someone says, "I'm tired," it's not always about lack of sleep. Sometimes it's exhaustion from pretending to be strong, from smiling while aching inside, from carrying the invisible weight of feeling like you don't belong anywhere, not even in your own skin. But instead of asking, "Tired how?" most people respond with, "You should sleep more." Just like that, the door to vulnerability slams shut. We retreat further, not because we wanted to lie, but because the risk of being misunderstood felt too high. So we shrink, we fall silent, and we walk away thinking, maybe no one will ever really get it. That feeling, that deep, wordless disappointment, is what we mean when we say, "This is exactly how we feel." Not necessarily the sadness itself, but the loneliness of having no one who can fully sit in that sadness with us. We're not asking people to solve us. We're not even asking them to save us. We just want them to witness us. To be present without judgment, without trying to fix the moment, and without turning our vulnerability into a spectacle. Psychologically, the need to be understood is one of the most powerful motivators in our emotional life. According to humanistic psychology, understanding is a fundamental aspect of self-actualization. It allows us to integrate our fragmented parts into a coherent identity. In plain terms, when someone truly sees us, we feel more real. We feel more whole. That's why so many people fall in love with those who simply listen, not because they're perfect, but because they provide the space where we can finally exhale. But let's go deeper. Philosophically speaking, understanding is an act of radical compassion. When you understand someone, you temporarily suspend your own world to enter theirs. It requires humility. It requires patience. It requires a willingness to let go of your assumptions and say, maybe there's more to this person than I thought. That's hard to do in a world obsessed with labeling people quickly: happy, dramatic, toxic, sensitive, cold. We're addicted to speed, but understanding isn't fast food, it's slow cooked, and it's worth the wait. Now here's the irony: we all want to be understood, but very few of us have been taught how to understand others. We're emotionally undereducated. We know how to give advice, how to talk, how to interrupt, but we don't know how to pause, how to say, "Tell me more," or how to simply hold space for someone else's truth without inserting our own. Most of us are stuck in this loop of emotional miscommunication, talking past each other, listening just enough to respond, but not enough to absorb. And yet, the most life-changing relationships, the ones that truly shift us from the inside out, are the ones where we don't have to over-explain who we are, where the person on the other side pays attention not just to our words, but to the emotional signature behind them. Where "I hear you" actually means "I feel you." That kind of understanding is healing. It's rare, and it's unforgettable. You'll never forget the first person who truly understood you. not because they agreed with you on everything, but because they didn't try to reshape you. They didn't weaponize your vulnerability. They didn't minimize your pain. They held it. They stayed. And in their presence, you finally felt like you had the right to take up space. So when we say, "This is exactly how we feel," what we're often trying to say is, "This is what we've been trying to show you all along." That behind the calm exterior is often chaos. Behind the confidence is sometimes a history of rejection. And behind the silence, there may be a scream that's gone unheard for years. And maybe the most radical thing we can do for each other is to slow down and listen. Not just to what's loud, but to what's subtle, to what's hidden, to what's sacred. Because the truth is, people don't need perfect partners, flawless friends, or expert therapists. What they need, what we all need, is someone who says, "I see you, I hear you, I'm with you." No fixing, no preaching, just presence. And if you can become that kind of person, even once, you'll change someone's life. And if you can find that kind of person, never take them for granted. Because in a world full of noise, someone who understands you is more valuable than someone who simply notices you. You know, we often get judged for the masks we wear. People call them fake, deceptive, even manipulative, but the truth, most of us didn't put those masks on to fool anyone. We put them on to survive the polished smiles, the composed tone, the easygoing attitude. These aren't lies, they're shields, protective layers we've learned to wear in a world that rarely makes room for raw, unfiltered emotion. It's not that we want to hide, it's that we've been taught that showing our real selves comes at a cost, sometimes too high to pay. People love to say, "Be authentic," but the moment you are too sensitive, too emotional, too intense, they start to retreat. They label you dramatic, weak, unstable. So over time, you learn to filter, to package your emotions into something more palatable. You learn when to speak, and when it's safer to stay silent. You learn that being open-hearted often leads to heartbreak. And eventually, the mask doesn't feel like a mask anymore, it feels like safety. But here's the thing, wearing that emotional armor comes with a price. Because the longer you keep it on, the more you start to lose touch with who you really are underneath it. You start mistaking your defense mechanisms for your identity. And after a while, you can't even tell whether you're protecting yourself or just hiding from yourself. Psychologically, this is the human response to emotional danger. When we experience shame, abandonment, or ridicule at our most vulnerable, our nervous system responds by building walls. It's a trauma reflex. It says, "Next time, don't show so much. Don't feel so much. Don't trust so fast." And so we start to armor up. We become the version of ourselves that gets accepted, even if it's only partially real. And ironically, the stronger the mask, the more people admire you. But the lonelier you feel, because you're not being loved for your truth. You're being loved for your presentation. And when you know that the love you're receiving is based on a version of you that's been edited and rehearsed, it doesn't feel like love. It feels like performance. This is exactly how we feel when we say, "You don't really know me." It's not just a complaint, it's a confession. A quiet grief that even in your presence we feel alone, not because we want to, but because we're too scared to show you what's real. We fear the moment the mask slips, you'll walk away, so we keep playing the role. And we hope, somewhere deep down, that someone might still see through it. But let's be honest, most people don't look past the surface. We live in a fast-paced, highly curated world. Image is everything. Depth is optional. We're more concerned with how someone appears than with how they actually are. And this social shallowness reinforces our need to protect ourselves. That's why so many people walk around feeling emotionally homeless. Smiling at parties, posting cute pictures, holding it together, but inside there's this aching question: if I stopped pretending for just a moment, would anyone still want me? Now, I'm not saying we should spill our souls to everyone we meet. Emotional boundaries are healthy. Not everyone has earned the right to access your vulnerability, but what I am saying is this: if we want real connection, deep, soul-level connection, we have to stop equating protection with hiding. Not every part of us needs to be hidden. Not every flaw is fatal. Sometimes your cracks are the only way light can reach another person. Philosophically, this dilemma speaks to something much deeper: the paradox of human existence. We long to be seen, but we fear being exposed. We crave closeness, but we push people away. We desire truth, but we curate a version of ourselves that feels safer to share. This isn't weakness. This is the human condition. We are constantly balancing between the need to belong and the need to protect our essence. And here's where it gets even more complex. Sometimes the mask becomes so comfortable, so convincing, that even we start believing in it. We begin living according to the character we've constructed, confident, unbothered, always in control. But underneath that character is a child still aching to be held, still longing for safety, still asking, is it okay to just be me? Yes, it is okay, but it's not always easy, because the path to emotional freedom starts with risk. The risk of being misunderstood, the risk of being rejected, the risk of being vulnerable with someone who might not know what to do with that vulnerability. But if you never take that risk, you remain locked in a cage of your own making. A cage that looks like strength on the outside, but feels like isolation on the inside. So what's the alternative? It's not about dropping the mask all at once. It's about finding safe spaces and safe people, those rare individuals who don't flinch when you show them your truth. It's about testing the waters of honesty, letting the mask slip just enough to breathe. And in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. You become a mirror for what's possible. You show that strength isn't about how well you can pretend, it's about how courageously you can be real. So if you're wearing a mask right now, and most of us are in some way, ask yourself, who am I hiding from? And more importantly, what am I protecting? Because maybe it's time to stop confusing protection with imprisonment. Maybe the version of you you're hiding is the exact version someone out there is waiting to love. We say we want freedom, and at first glance, who wouldn't? Emotional freedom, financial freedom, relationship freedom. The ability to wake up and feel light, unburdened by expectations, untangled from other people's control. It's a beautiful concept, liberating, bold, empowering. But when we really look deeper, when we examine how we live, how we choose, how we behave, it becomes painfully clear. Most people are far more afraid of freedom than they are oppressed by the lack of it. See, freedom isn't just about breaking chains. It's about owning what comes next. And that's the part we don't talk about enough. Because when you finally let go of what limits you, be it a toxic relationship, a job you've outgrown, or an identity that no longer fits, you are left with something far more terrifying than captivity. You're left with responsibility. Responsibility to build, to decide, to choose. And this is exactly how we feel torn. We cry out for liberation, but when we get it, we often run right back to the familiar. Not because it's good for us, but because it's known. Because it's safe, because at least in that familiar pain we understand the rules. True freedom means there's no one left to blame. There's no one else to hide behind. You can't point to your circumstances, your partner, your parents, your past and say, "This is why I'm stuck." Because freedom demands that you take the reins. It demands that you accept that where you go from here is on you, and that's scary. That level of autonomy isn't for the faint of heart. It requires you to confront everything you've avoided. It forces you to ask questions you've buried for years. What do I really want? Who am I outside of what I've been told to be? What if I build the life I've dreamed of, and it still doesn't fulfill me? These are not casual questions. These are soul-shifting inquiries, and most people don't want to sit with them. So instead we stall, we self-sabotage, we stay in situations that are slowly killing our spirit because the alternative, freedom, feels too overwhelming, too uncertain, too exposed. Psychologically, we are creatures of pattern. The brain prefers predictability. It wants to know what comes next, even if next is pain. That's why people stay in loops, because the loop, no matter how dysfunctional, is comfortable. We call this learned helplessness, the psychological condition where people stop trying to escape a bad situation because they believe they have no control, even when the door is wide open. But this isn't just psychology. Philosophically, this touches on the core paradox of human existence. We crave meaning, but we fear the emptiness that often comes before it. Freedom is an empty space. It is a blank canvas, and a blank canvas can be paralyzing, because it asks you to paint without a script, to become the artist of your own life. There's no one to hand you a brush, no one to draw the outlines for you. You have to decide what the picture is. And in a world that constantly hands us templates of how to love, how to succeed, how to behave, that kind of decision-making can feel like too much, so we go back, not because we want to, but because the silence of freedom is louder than the noise of captivity. And this is exactly where most people lose themselves, not in the fight to break free, but in the weight of what comes after, because breaking the chains is just the beginning. Walking away is just the first step. What comes next is the slow, deliberate work of choosing yourself every single day, of holding yourself accountable to your dreams, of no longer blaming your pain on someone else's decisions. That's the real work. That's the real liberation. So no, we're not lazy. We're not weak. We're just scared. Scared that if we take full ownership of our lives, we'll have no one left to protect us from our own potential. Because here's the truth most people won't say out loud. Sometimes it's easier to be a victim of your circumstances than to be the architect of your destiny. But what if you could unlearn that fear? What if you could step into your freedom not as a burden, but as a privilege? What if you could look at the blank canvas of your life and say, I don't need a map, I'll build the path as I walk it. That shift doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen the moment you stop waiting for someone to give you permission. The moment you realize that freedom isn't something you're handed, it's something you claim quietly, boldly, repeatedly, you start to notice when you're shrinking to fit into someone else's narrative. You start to challenge the old programming that tells you you're not enough. And slowly, your choices begin to reflect who you are, not who you've been conditioned to be. And with every step forward, no matter how uncertain, you begin to prove something to yourself, that you are capable of carrying the weight of your own life, that you can be both free and fearless, that you can live without the mask, without the chains, without the need for constant validation. So if you're standing on the edge of something right now, if you feel the pull between what's known and what's possible, don't just ask yourself what you're walking away from. Ask yourself what you're willing to walk toward. You know what most people misunderstand about us. It's not just what we say, how we feel, or what we do, but why we do it. They see the distance, the hesitation, the silence, and they assume disinterest, coldness, or confusion. But they don't realize that much of our behavior is not random. It's not even reactive, it's defensive, not against others, but against ourselves, against what we're afraid we might feel if we ever truly let go. This is the quiet truth. Most of us are not afraid of being hurt. We've survived hurt before. What we fear is feeling too deeply, because when you've lived through enough emotional chaos, enough loss, disappointment, betrayal, you start to associate depth with danger. You start to believe that every high will be followed by a crash, that every moment of connection is a countdown to disconnection. And so, little by little, you begin to build walls, not all at once and not always intentionally. But slowly, subtly, you pull back when someone gets too close. You downplay your needs so you don't seem too much. You laugh instead of cry. You distract yourself with busyness. You call it independence, strength, or just being chill. But if you're honest, it's fear in disguise. And this is exactly how we feel, emotionally cautious. Not because we don't want love or depth or connection, but because we've experienced what happens when we open up without protection. And it's hard to forget that kind of pain. It imprints on your nervous system. It teaches you that love is a risk and vulnerability is exposure. And so we learn to stay in the shallow end of emotional intimacy, even though we secretly long to dive in. This inner conflict creates what psychologists call ambivalent attachment, where we desire closeness but fear it at the same time. We lean in, then pull back. We crave connection, but push people away when they get too close. It's not inconsistency. It's not manipulation. It's survival. It's the way we try to control emotional unpredictability by staying one step removed, one foot out the door just in case. But the cost of that kind of emotional self-protection is steep. Because while you might avoid pain, you also end up starving yourself of joy, of intimacy, of being truly seen. You live behind an invisible glass wall, watching life happen but never fully stepping into it. And here's the philosophical irony: the very thing we're trying to avoid, emotional pain, is also the very thing that makes our experiences real. You can't selectively numb feelings. If you numb fear, you numb excitement. If you mute sadness, you dilute love. If you block out grief, you also block out awe. Emotional depth doesn't come with an on-off switch. It comes as a full package. You either feel fully or you live halfway. And that halfway living, that's what exhausts us. That's what keeps us awake at night, scrolling through distractions, wondering why we still feel empty even when everything on the outside looks okay. Because our soul knows it was never meant to live a life of emotional neutrality. We were built to feel deeply, wildly, unapologetically, not all the time, but enough to stay alive inside. But in order to do that, we have to unlearn the reflex to withdraw. We have to confront the belief that says love will always hurt, that trusting someone will always backfire, that opening up means losing control. That narrative was written by past pain, but it doesn't have to define the future. We can rewrite it slowly, bravely, intentionally, because while yes, vulnerability can hurt, it can also heal, it can bond, it can liberate, it can allow us to breathe again. The problem isn't that we feel too much. The problem is that we've never been given a safe space to process what we feel. So we suppress it, and what we suppress turns into anxiety, numbness, or emotional detachment. But there's another way, a different path. It begins by asking ourselves a simple but confronting question. What am I so afraid to feel that I'd rather stay disconnected than risk experiencing it? And once you have your answer, whether it's rejection, abandonment, disappointment, shame, you have to ask the harder question. What is that fear costing me? Because for many of us, it's costing everything. The kind of love we truly want, the depth of friendship we crave, the peace that only comes when you stop pretending and finally let yourself be real. So no, we're not emotionless, we're not cold, we're not detached. We're guarded, cautious, wounded maybe, but not incapable of love. And more importantly, not beyond healing. And maybe that healing doesn't come from never being hurt again, but from realizing that pain is survivable, and that living with your heart closed is a far greater loss than any heartbreak could ever be. So if you've been holding back, staying silent, retreating into yourself, this is your invitation to begin opening again, just a little with the right people at your own pace. Not because it guarantees safety, but because it gives you something far more powerful. There's something we need to talk about, something subtle but powerful. It's the way we carry other people's expectations like silent weights on our backs. How we walk through life trying to live up to versions of ourselves that we never even agreed to. And maybe the most painful part, we rarely realize we're doing it until we look in the mirror and don't recognize who's looking back. You see, many of us were not taught to ask, "Who am I?" Instead, we were told who to be, and we followed it, because when you're young, approval feels like survival. You learn quickly that being too emotional makes people uncomfortable, that being too ambitious makes you threatening, that being too quiet gets you overlooked, so you adjust, you shave down your edges, you modify your truth until it fits into the shape other people find acceptable. And after years of doing this, your sense of self becomes a patchwork of roles you've played just to keep the peace. This is exactly how we feel, like we're living in costumes that don't quite fit anymore. But we keep wearing them because we don't want to disappoint anyone. We don't want to be seen as difficult, selfish, ungrateful. So we keep showing up as the version of ourselves that's easiest for others to digest. But on the inside, we're restless, we're tired, and we're craving something real. What we don't realize is that constantly performing for others slowly disconnects us from our own inner compass. We lose the ability to discern what's true for us, because we've spent so long tuning into everyone else's needs. And when your identity is built around meeting other people's expectations, even the smallest act of authenticity can feel like rebellion. And that's the trap, because on the surface everything can look perfectly fine. You're functioning, you're productive, you're being who you're supposed to be, but underneath that is a quiet kind of suffering, a deep sense of misalignment. You feel it in the way your passions start to fade, in the way you stop looking forward to things, in the way you start to feel like a stranger in your own life. Psychologically, this is what Carl Jung called the false self. It's the version of you constructed to navigate the world safely. But the danger is when the false self becomes your only self, when you're so busy meeting expectations that you forget what you were meant to become. That's when the depression creeps in, the anxiety. The numbness, not because you're broken, but because your life is no longer in harmony with your soul. Philosophically, this brings us to a difficult truth. You cannot live a meaningful life if it's based on someone else's definition of meaning. You can chase every goal they set for you: status, security, validation. But if it doesn't align with your essence, you will never feel fulfilled, because fulfillment doesn't come from how others see you. It comes from how honestly you see yourself, and that level of self-honesty, it's confronting. It forces you to ask, who am I when no one is watching? What do I want if no one's clapping for it? What part of me have I silenced just to keep being loved? Most people avoid those questions. Not because they don't matter, but because the answers might require change. And change is scary, especially when it threatens the relationships and identities you've built your life around. But staying inauthentic for the sake of peace is not peace, it's self-abandonment. And the longer you abandon yourself, the more you begin to disappear, and we feel it, that slow erosion of self, the quiet grief of being known but not really known, the moments where we laugh, smile, perform, then retreat into silence wondering, does anyone even know who I am? So we keep ourselves small. We dim the parts of us that are too loud, too bold, too complex. We stay in relationships that ask us to shrink. We stay in jobs that require us to wear masks. And we tell ourselves that this is just how life works. But deep down we know the truth. This isn't living. This is surviving. This is performance. This is what it looks like when you trade authenticity for acceptance. But the thing is, there comes a point where the cost becomes too high, where the ache of inauthenticity becomes louder than the fear of being misunderstood. And when that moment comes, you'll have a choice. Stay in the life that pleases everyone else, or begin building the life that finally sets you free. No, it won't be easy. Choosing yourself never is. You will lose some people. You will disappoint expectations. You might even walk away from things you once thought were essential. But what you gain is far more powerful: integrity. A life that feels like yours, a voice that doesn't tremble when it speaks the truth, a sense of peace that doesn't require permission. And when you reach that place, where your inner world and outer life are in alignment, you begin to feel something you may not have felt in a long time: wholeness. Not perfection, not applause, just the quiet knowing that you are no longer performing, you are finally being. So if you're feeling like you're drifting, disconnected, out of sync, it may not be that you're lost. It may just be that you've outgrown the version of yourself that was never fully you. There's one more thing we rarely say out loud, because it's uncomfortable, even a little shameful to admit. But here it is. Sometimes we sabotage the very things we say we want. Not because we don't care, not because we're reckless, but because deep down we don't believe we deserve it. And that belief, though often invisible, is powerful enough to shape the entire course of our lives. You see, it's one thing to want love, to want peace, to want success. It's another thing entirely to believe we are worthy of receiving and sustaining those things. And if no one ever taught us that we were, if we grew up being criticized more than we were celebrated, if we learned early that love was conditional or inconsistent or earned through performance, then we carry those lessons into adulthood. Quietly, unconsciously, like emotional programming we never chose but still run on every day. And this is exactly how we feel. Like no matter how much we achieve, how kind we are, how much we give to others, we still struggle to feel whole. We chase moments of validation. We pour ourselves into fixing others. We build up our lives on the outside. But inside, there's a constant hum of unworthiness. It doesn't scream, but it's always there. Whispering doubts, undermining joy, making us question whether we're truly enough. The cruel part is, it shows up in subtle ways. You get close to someone and suddenly you find reasons to push them away. You finally get an opportunity and suddenly you're procrastinating or second, guessing your every move. You say you want peace, but when things finally feel calm, you start creating chaos, just to feel something familiar again. That's not stupidity. That's not immaturity. That's your nervous system craving what it knows, not what it needs. Psychologically, this is the power of self-concept. We will always act in ways that confirm our internal beliefs. If we believe we're not good enough, we will unconsciously gravitate towards situations, people, and patterns that reinforce that narrative, even if they hurt. Because as strange as it sounds, predictable pain feels safer than uncertain joy. And if no one ever taught you how to receive, how to sit with love without suspicion, how to allow success without guilt, how to feel at home in your own skin, then when it shows up, you'll question it. You'll pick it apart, you'll convince yourself it's temporary, or a fluke, or a trick, and just like that, you'll sabotage what you worked so hard to call in. This isn't about being dramatic or broken. It's about survival. When you've spent years feeling unseen, you start to build a self-worth system that's reactive, not rooted. You base your value on how others respond to you, not how you feel about yourself. And over time, your identity becomes a house built on sand. It looks stable until love enters, or success, or stillness, and then suddenly everything feels like it might collapse. So what do? We armor up. We project ourselves before anyone else can. We stay busy to avoid stillness. We downplay our dreams. We stay in relationships where we feel like we constantly have to earn our place, because it mirrors the emotional conditions we're used to. And when something good finally finds us, we either run from it or ruin it. But here's the philosophical irony. Everything we want is already within our reach. The real gatekeeper is not the world. It's the story we keep telling ourselves about what we're worthy of. And until we change that story, everything else will feel like a temporary win, a borrowed life, a house we're just waiting to be kicked out of. And maybe the hardest truth to face is this: we are often the ones standing in our own way, not because we want to fail, but because success challenges the beliefs we've built our identity on, because love exposes the parts of us that feel unlovable, because happiness feels suspicious when you've been hurt for too long. And so, even though we want to move forward, we find ourselves stuck, torn between the safety of the familiar and the risk of something greater. But the risk is worth it, because the cost of staying in this cycle of self-doubt, of sabotage, of playing small is a life half lived, a heart half open, a soul constantly negotiating with itself. At some point, we have to stop waiting to feel ready, worthy, perfect. We have to realize that healing doesn't mean never feeling afraid. It means acting from truth, not trauma. It means noticing when those old beliefs show up and choosing not to feed them. It means showing up for the life you want even when your inner critic is screaming that you're not enough. Because you are. Not when you earn more. Not when you look a certain way. Not when you're perfectly healed. Now you are worthy of a life that doesn't feel like a performance, of love that doesn't make you question yourself, of rest that isn't earned, of joy that doesn't feel like a trick. You are worthy because you exist. And no past pain, no old narrative, no conditioned belief can take that away from you unless you let it. So the next time something good finds you, pause, breathe, don't run, don't reject it, don't shrink.